Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here in the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, back again to talk about everything basketball with you here today, Brice Lewis. Yes, sir, we're back on the track once again. I'm going to go ahead and give y'all the updates of all of basketball land. You know, we have a pretty easygoing show today. I think we have an easygoing show in that day. Where basically, listen, we're going to start off, we're going to talk about the Golden State Warriors. Should they blow it up? Because that's been a discussional topic. But I also want to talk about Bradley Beal dropping 60 points in a loss to the Sixers. And about, could we see a trade potentially soon for Bradley Beal? Not because the Wizards want to trade him, but maybe because Bradley Beal, the way the Wizards season has started, may just want to finally say, you know what? Let's move on. We're also going to talk about just in general, when does a team know when to blow it up? When do they know, okay, this isn't working or our run is over, let's blow it up? Then we're also going to talk about other NBA news around the slate, such as I have a trade theory potentially about the Clippers as they still need a point guard, an update on the James Harden situation, and so much more. So that's what we're going to talk about here today on the podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast once again. So I'm going to get into the Bradley Beal subject first. So Bradley Beal has been in trade talks the last couple of seasons. Just because the Wizards have not been really good. John Wall was hurt. They haven't been really good. And, you know, he's been balling. Bradley Beal has been balling out, having career years the last 2 years. But, I mean, he's lost a lot. And sometimes when you're a player who always balls out, but it never results in wins, that can be frustrating. That can be very taxing on you. Am I sacrificing myself every day for this team, knowing it will not result in victories and success? We've been hearing about multiple teams being interested in Bradley Beal. If the Wizards put him up for trade talks, the Wizards have listened to calls, but have also came out and said, we will not trade Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal has said he wants to stay in Washington. He has had opportunities to force Washington's hand, but said, no, I'm going to let it play out. So, you remember last year, I think Bradley Beal had 50 in a game, and they lost. And then this past week, he's had 60 against the Sixers and loss. And you could tell after the game he seemed very dejected. And sometimes as a player, it just weighs on you. It weighs on you a lot as a player. And so, if we remember, coming into this season, let's not forget, he thought he was going to be playing with John Wall. He thought, I'm going to run it back with John. We're going to see how it go. We'll see what happens. Then they traded John Wall, which shocked Bradley. They brought in Russell Westbrook, which Russell Westbrook is fine. People still thought, you know what? Russell Westbrook, Bradley Beal, that should still be an 8th, 7th seed in the Eastern Conference. And the Wizards currently are 2-6. Looking like they may not even be in the top 10 teams to compete to get into the playoffs. And obviously the season is still early, but if you're Bradley Beal and this continues and you have this Russell and you're having these big performances and then, you know, the trade deadline gets near, y'all firmly the 14th, 13th best team in the Eastern Conference. If you're Bradley Beal, wouldn't you consider potentially asking for a trade? Like really, like isn't that something that would cross your mind? Would you be like, you know what? I've given everything to this city of DC that I could. And it's just not working here, and it's time to move on. Because to me, Washington is still in a rebuilding process. They still are very much in a rebuilding process. And it's not good that you have 2 star players and you're still not able to win. And so for me, I'm looking at things and I think to myself, if I'm Bradley Beal, it may be time. Because the thing about Bradley Beal is he has opportunities to go to winning teams, playoff teams, championship contending teams. They want him because people see the value that Bradley Beal brings to a team. He would be a superb third option and a great second option. Teams were willing to really put in work to go after Bradley Beal, but Bradley Beal said no. So if I'm Bradley Beal, I think that I have to consider potentially asking and requesting a trade. Because if he continues to put up performances like this and the results continue to be losses, after a while it just weighs on you where it's just like it just feels like you're at a dead end. You're hitting a wall every time. Every time you step out in the court. You know how it must feel for a player to go out on that court knowing I could drop 60 tonight and we still could lose by 10 plus points. I could drop 65 and we may not even be in a competitive game. Usually if a player drops that many points, it's a very close game or they're blowing the other team. Well, that usually never happens in a blowout because usually sit out. But you're probably winning that game or you're in a very close game. Which it did become close with the 76ers. But the 76ers pulled away again. And so I just feel like if you're Bradley Beal, you ran it back with this season to see what the Wizards would look like with John Wall. You're seeing it with Russell Westbrook instead. You're seeing it's not looking good. And like I said, things can change. Things can change. The Wizards could then go on a 5-game winning streak, and now they're 500. And then it's like, okay. But if nothing does change, if you're Bradley Beal, you have to seriously consider potentially moving on. It's just something you got to think about because with everything that's happened at Washington, you're in your prime of your career. You can't just keep giving years to a team that you know you're not going to do anything on. See, at least people talk about Damian Lillard and his loyalty to Portland. Hey, Portland make it to the playoffs every year. Portland made it to the Western Conference Finals 2 years ago. Portland, year by year, could maybe be a team with Damian Lillard that could make it to the first round, second round, Western Conference Finals, maybe even the finals, depending on how the year goes, depending on how the team goes. At least you could go in every game knowing we're going to win 40, 50 games a year. We're going to make the playoffs every year, and there's going to be a chance every year we get to the dance to make something happen. But imagine if you're a Bradley Beal situation where you may not even be within 10 games of making the playoffs, potentially. 8 games of making the playoffs. Not having a chance. Putting out your best performances and not winning. It hit different. It hit different. And for me, that's why if I'm Bradley Beal, you got to at least consider asking for a trade if the trade deadline comes along and the Wizards are still not in a good place. And then I transition into this. Golden State. I talked about them a couple of weeks ago. I said, I think they started off 0-2, 0-3. Kelly Oubre was playing horribly. Andrew Wiggins was in. Curry was fine, but wasn't lighting anything up. And I said the Warriors really weren't playing that well. Now they've played better. They have a winning record now. They just lost to the Clippers in a back-and-forth game. Clippers put them away late. So they're playing much better basketball. But there's still some discussion if Golden State might blow it up. And by blow it up, it's not more than likely Curry wouldn't be a person they would move. But maybe move a guy like a Draymond Green potentially. Because Draymond is a guy who, at this point, the way the team is constructed, you may be able to let go of Draymond. Maybe Andrew Wiggins may be back on the trade market. Get you some assets. You clearly have a young star in James Wiseman. He has probably been the most positive part of this Warriors season, James Wiseman. He clearly shows he can play. He looks like he could be a star big man. And so if you're the Warriors, you honestly could look at it like this. Okay, so we have Curry. Clay's going to be back next year. If Clay can be what he used to be, to 90% of that, that's still really good. And then we have a star up-and-coming big man in James Wiseman. If you think about that, to me, Kelly Oubre becomes a little bit expendable. Even though they just made a trade, so they're probably, I don't see them trading Kelly Oubre after trading to get him. So I think he's good. But Draymond Green, I feel like, becomes very extendable. Because, remember, Draymond Green was the quote-unquote big man of that team. He was the best front court player they had. He was the star of it. He was part of the big three. But now with James Wiseman being what he is, can stretch the floor, better offensive player, and good defensively as well, Draymond Green becomes much more expendable. He becomes a player that you're like, he's older, expensive. You know what? James Wiseman's here. We can afford to maybe let him go. And so, to me, if I'm Golden State, I definitely consider trying to get some assets for the future. I still say their bench potentially could be a weakness in terms of they don't have one of the strongest benches in the league to me. But you could get some assets, some key role players for the future that you like. It's almost like you can start constructing your team. You can start constructing your team, not necessarily for next year. Because with Curry in them, I'm sure they're still going to play hard. And they may still be in the playoff race by the end of the year, but you can start kind of getting some things together for next year, waiting for Clay's return. You have pieces, Steph and Wiseman, and you can kind of work with that. And so if I'm Golden State, I have to take that under consideration. So it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do. It'll be interesting to see if they do make a move. Because, like I said, the Blazers are a team that has reportedly shown interest in a Draymond Green. So that's a team that potentially you could trade him to. Maybe get a Rodney Hood back, potentially. Maybe a pick or two. Like I said, just some guys that you can say, okay, we like the roster going forward. We like the roster going into next year. And we'll see what happens. So, Golden State has interesting decisions to make. I think the one thing about Bob Myers and them, they've always been good at forwardly thinking into the future, thinking about, okay, what do we need to do to be good for years to come? They're not always thinking about just the year prior. They always think future. That's why Golden State was ahead of the pack when they were in their dynasty. They always kept thinking, how can we stay on top? And I think that's still the thinking, where now there's not staying on top, it's how can we get back to the top? What pieces do we need? What can we change to get there? You see what you have, see what you can improve, and make something happen from there. And that's what I think Golden State's really good at. It'll be interesting to see trade deadline, they may decide want to move some pieces. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, now I'm going to get into, in terms of a team in general, when do you know when to blow it up? Stay tuned.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Yes, sir. Last segment, we discussed Bradley Beal. Will the lack of success, the lack of winning, and him having great performances and losing, potentially not break Bradley Beal, but push him to his breaking point, where he will decide to request a trade from the Wizards? We haven't heard anything right now, but if you saw that Philadelphia game, you saw how he looked after the game, looking like that. I'm sure he does not want to continue to look like that on a game-to-game basis, especially, with the expectations coming into this year for Washington. Everybody might have expected Washington to be a bad team, but maybe he thought with Russell, Bortons, we could have been better. And so far, if this continues the way it's been going this season, he may have to seriously consider it. We also discussed the Golden State Warriors. Should they blow it up? Potentially start thinking ahead. With James Wiseman kind of breaking out this year, Draymond Green becomes a much more expendable player. Potentially Andrew Wiggins as well. You never know who Bob Myers could be trying to move, because he's always going to think about, the future. How can I always keep this team ready to go for the future? Things happen, setbacks happen. He may feel like setbacks have kept us from being better than what we have been, but he probably feels good moving forward. So, now I'm going to get into a discussion about, in overall terms, as a franchise, when is it time to blow things up, to restart, to full rebuild? Now, this can come in many different ways. It could come from a team that has been winning for years. Players are starting to get a little older, and you're starting to see a decline. Knowing, okay, this may be the last great year we have, so I might need to start making some moves. Some organizations say, you know what, we're going to stick it out with these guys, and we'll just completely flip it on his back the next year. Sometimes it's a team that is trying to be good. They brought in talent, they brought in players, drafted certain guys, and things aren't just working out. It just seems like it's a failed experiment, and now you got to restart it again. Sometimes it's the peripheral team that is good enough to make the playoffs year after year, but never good enough to make it any further, maybe than the first or second round. And you're just tired of being that mediocre ceiling. Your ceiling has been reached, and you can't do anything else. And either you settle for what you've been doing, or you try to restart this thing. So there's many different ways to get to this point. There's not just one way. But the question is, when do you know, just in every general sense, hey, it's time to blow it up? And so, here's the thing. The thing is this. First thing to me is, who are the core players? Usually you dictate that decision for every team off the core players, who you designate as your core players. Because they're going to tell you when it's time. They're the players that usually you consider your best players. The players that you consider the ones that will get us to the promised land. Think about it. Lakers, their core players, LeBron and AD. Those are the core players. Think about Clippers, Paul George and Kawhi. Think about the Warriors, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. Those are the core players. Those are the guys that will help you determine, okay, is it time to blow it up? That's your core. Every team has a core group of players. And usually multiple reasons why the core group maybe is sending that message. Injuries. We know there have been situations in throughout history where players have just been hurt. Best player was hurt. Think about it. When Chicago with Derrick Rose, their core players, Derrick Rose, Taj Gibson, Joe King Noah. But Derrick Rose was really the complete, he was basically the core, basically. So when he got hurt, they were never able to be as good as some people thought they could have been. And so injuries happen. Sometimes players get hurt. And so think about Golden State right now. Clay is a part of the core. Clay hasn't been here for the last 2 years. That's why we're having all this discussion about blowing it up, moving, making some changes, them going through lackluster seasons. Because one of the core players aren't there. Also age. Sometimes they're just getting older. We've seen this example, San Antonio, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Tim Duncan. They just got old. And you had to move off of them. Tony Parker wanted to come back to San Antonio, but Derek Popovich said it's time. Manu Ginobili retired. Tim Duncan retired. Sometimes it's just time. Players just get out of their prime. Same thing with Kobe. You just get to that point where it's time. And even though he's older, he's still part of your core. And if he gets too old and he's not able to perform to the same level to still be successful as a team, then hey, we appreciate everything you've done for us. Or you have to, or what some teams do, you keep him on the team, but he basically can't be in your core. He's not your core anymore. He's just now another player on your team that just has a lot of history behind him. So that's one. Sometimes you just, maybe if you draft up some players or you sign a couple of guys and it just doesn't work out. They're just not reaching expectations. We can go back to San Antonio again. DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge. Nobody thought that was a championship duo, but you see where they are right now. Barely missed the playoffs last year. They may barely miss the playoffs again this year. Their core just isn't good enough. Greg Popovich knows he's going to have to blow it up. People thought they might blow it up this offseason. They didn't. Sometimes you just don't have a good enough core group of players to actually, compete at the level that you maybe thought y'all could have competed at. So sometimes you have to look at that and say, okay, this isn't working. I mean, think about Russell Westbrook at Oklahoma City. Him and Steven Adams were basically the core of that team when KD left. But that wasn't going to be good enough to win, which is why eventually they had to go their separate ways. Every team has this dilemma where one of those three situations happen. Sometimes teams see, okay, we think out of, let's say you have three core players. Two of them are really good, exactly what you expected, but one isn't reaching expectations. Some teams try to trade that guy, try to bring in another core piece, say he'll be the new core, third. He'll work better for the other two. Because the core is always the team that you build around. Think about Milwaukee. They're building around Giannis, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton. That's their core. They are expecting those three players are the players that the Milwaukee Bucks expect to get them to the championship. They're just supplying them with other players to give them enough support. That's why they call it a supporting cast. But they're the three that they're going to be looking at to take it home for them. Obviously, Giannis is the superstar of the group, so he'll have the most scrutiny. But Drew Holiday has a lot of pressure. That's why Eric Bledsoe was out there. He was a part of that core group last year. That's a great example of what I mean by sometimes you got to trade one of your core pieces for another core piece. It was Drew. It was Giannis, Eric, Chris. Eric wasn't getting it done. So you know what they said? Okay, we're going to bring in Drew. We think Drew is an upgrade. He's now going to be that core point guard for us. It's a decision that every team has to make. That's why sometimes you see teams maybe hesitant to re-sign certain guys. Because they look at it and think, are we really sure we want him and so-and-so to be the core? Do we think it can get us to where we want to go? That's why sometimes you see certain teams hesitant to sign certain players to contracts. Because they just aren't convinced that, hey, this guy can get us to where we want to go, so let's go and sign him. You're going through that right now with the Atlanta Hawks and John Collins. Not sure if they feel like not that John's not a good player, but maybe he just feels like in terms of if the Hawks want to compete for a championship one day, do we really think John Collins can be a very driving force with that with Trae Young? Same thing with Orlando. Now, we know Markelle Fultz is out for the year with a torn ACL, but the way he was playing, he was seeming like he was going to be the drive of that team. It was going to be him and Vucevic, Isaac. They were going to be the core of that team. Now you just lost the core for one of your key pieces for the rest of the year. Now you're just back to the same Orlando team you were last year. So Vucevic may be still back on the trade block. They may say, we need to get rid of Vucevic, try to find another core player. All of it are questions that a team has to answer when creating a team. Why do you think Bob Myers has consistently always tried to find players consistently? And why do you think Golden State's always been confident, feeling like if Clay and Steph are healthy and Draymond is healthy, we have a chance. All we have to do is just supply them with enough talent around them and we could be a finals team. That's why the Klay Thompson thing is hurting them so much. Because now you don't have that core piece. So you can mismatch players and try to find players to salvage the season, but they ain't the core. They ain't the group for what you want to be. You're doing this to salvage. Kelly Oubre was traded for to just help salvage the season because they don't want to go through another 16 and 50 or 54 season since there's only 72 games. 56. That's why they got him. They said, wait, with Wiseman and Oubre and Wiggins and Curry, if Curry can stay healthy, maybe we could still be a 30-40 win team, maybe. Gives you confidence if you are. Make you say, oh, when Clay gets back, that 40 can go to 50. But it's one of the things that people think about. And so you just kind of have to look at the core of your team, of your favorite team, and say, do you believe in this core? Do you think the core is good enough? Who would you move if you think the core could be upgraded? That's everything that comes into that type of process of trying to decide when to blow it up. When you feel like the core has reached its peak and it can't go any further, and the furthest it can go is the semifinals, you blow it up. That's what happens with Lob City. Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan could only make it to the Western Conference semifinals. And they said, you know what? And they kept getting there and losing. They said, okay, this isn't not going to get us to where we want to go. So we got to blow it up. We got to blow it up and make some changes, which they did. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, man. It's going to be real interesting. But that's just a little bit of my insight, I guess you can say, into why or when I think teams will blow it up. So see if you agree with me. See if you've been able to follow on what I've been saying also for the last 14 minutes. So, yeah. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some more NBA news, so stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to Extreme Cage Fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. So, last segment I basically talked about when is it time to break up a core? When is it time to break it up, blow up the entire thing, and rebuild? I gave the reasons, at least, I believe, why you do it. Now, I mean, there's more, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure issues within, the locker room, people ain't getting along, beef, certain stuff. All that can also contribute to anything like that. We've seen it throughout history. But those were the three things, the main things that I feel like every year we're saying with teams. You know what I'm saying? It's just like their maximum. They're not able to reach a certain peak. Injuries, certain things like that, age. All of that contributes to that type of decision. So that's just a part of it. But, now we're going to continue on. So now, let me talk about those Phoenix Suns. So the Suns right now are currently 6-2, coming off of winning against Toronto. They are off to another great start. The Suns, we know what happened last year in the bubble. 8-0 in the bubble. A lot of people really wish we could have got a Damian Lillard, Devin Booker playing. They acquired Chris Paul this offseason, a franchise Hall of Fame point guard. They have Devin Booker, one of the best scorers in the league. And I think now with the Suns being relevant, getting more nationally televised games, people are finally able to see how good Devin Booker really is. You got DeAndre Ayton, a very good young player for them. They drafted with the number 1 overall pick a couple of years ago. Played very well for them. They have some nice young pieces around him. Monty Williams, I have to give credit to Monty Williams. Monty Williams has always been a good head coach. He's always been a good head coach. He's always been responsible, it feels like, to take teams like this, young teams, trying to get over the top and help them. And, this is another job he's had. So, he's had some failures in his life, but he's also done well. People know he's a good coach. That's why he keeps getting opportunity. And he's showing it here in Phoenix. So now the question with Phoenix is, how far can they go? Now, even with Chris Paul being acquired, some people looked at Phoenix as a above the playoff line team. But I think this Phoenix team could be a top 4 team. I truly believe that. Because I don't think Denver's as good as they were last year. And so I think the Suns could beat them. And I'm saying this honestly. I think they could beat the Suns. I think the only 2 teams that you just know in the Western Conference are probably going to be the top 2 are the Lakers and the Clippers. Everybody else, I feel like, is up for grabs. It's a scramble. It's a who's who. And I think Phoenix could rise up the boards because of that. They have the elite scorer in Devin Booker. They have the elite facilitator, the elite leader, Chris Paul. They play great defense. That's one thing Monty Williams has got instilled to this team is defense. They play defense. DeAndre Ayton, a big man who can pound, score in the paint, but even can stretch out and hit the 3 if he needs to. Those are the core players. And, Phoenix, they're a team to me who, like I said, I don't know where they're going to finish. But with the Western Conference being as open to me as it is, there's definitely a possibility there for them. There's definitely a chance there for them. And I think that they're going to be in a really good spot. So, overall, I think the Suns are a team that we need to put some respect on their name. We need to sit here and say, okay, Phoenix is going to be there. Because listen, we saw what Chris Paul did to a team that was supposed to be rebuilding. Now, what about a team that has expectations, but still has young stars? And so, and don't forget also, Chris Paul is one of the most clutch players in the NBA. And so is Devin Booker. So they got guys who could take that last shot. So the Suns are now finally exciting in Phoenix. When was the last time the Phoenix Suns were exciting? Now, I think a lot of people forget they had a 40-win-plus season years ago, but they missed the playoffs. So that wasn't a bad year. But in terms of excitement, they really haven't been excited since the 7-second Suns. Like, really. Like, honestly, like, actual excitement. And I know Arizona is a great basketball city. They just haven't had a team to get excited about. They've been going through mediocrity most of the 2010s. And so now to start the 2020s and to have a team be this promising is such a great start for this fan base and for this organization. Do you remember that story that came out on Phoenix? I want to say it was 2 years ago. About how there was a goat let loose in the organization because I believe the GM at the time, I don't know if it was the owner or the GM, one of the two, basically were trying to send a message. We need a GOAT on our team. We need a star player, basically, a superstar. And so a GOAT went rampant in the office. And there was just a lot of issues with the front office and the ownership. There was a lot of disagreements, up there. And to go from that embarrassing story to now being a team that's getting nationally televised games, has to be respected, has a young star, has a veteran star, and now legitimately I think could finish at best maybe even third, fourth in the Western Conference. I mean, that's a turnaround. That is truly a turnaround that they can be proud of. And so the Phoenix Suns are going to be a team that's here to stay for the rest of this year, at least. But I want to go into this. So what was the biggest need for the Clippers this offseason? Point guard. Kawhi even told the Clippers management, I need a playmaking point guard. Now, they weren't able to acquire one. Rondo went to Atlanta. That was the main target. They weren't able to get anybody else in free agency or acquire anybody from trade. But obviously, they still have the ability to acquire a person. Beginning of the season, you see what you have, work what you have. But there's one player to me. And if this player's team's season continues to go the way it's going, he might be up on the trade block by trade deadline time. And that's when the Clippers can swoop in. Really good player. A leader. A defender. A championship pedigree. Has experience playing with Kawhi Leonard. Maybe that gave it away. If the season continues like it does in Toronto, I think the Clippers should go after Kyle Lowry. I think that would be the perfect player for their situation. A guy who doesn't need the ball, so it could still run through Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. But then Lowry is able to take the shot if needed. He can make plays if needed. He can run and facilitate if needed. He's a defender. Kyle Lowry got that dog in him. He's a better Patrick Beverly who can actually do more only on the end. He can run the team. And if Kawhi Leonard wanted a point guard, why not Kyle Lowry? We heard Terry Rozier was someone they wanted, but we know with the contract that Terry Rozier has and how much Jordan likes him, it was unlikely the Clippers were going to be able to get a guy like that unless getting a third team involved. They may still have to get a third team involved with Kyle Lowry, but I feel like Kyle Lowry would be a better fit. And I think with the culture they're trying to establish, especially thinking about Ty Lue, I think he would want a guy like Kyle Lowry there. I really do. I think he would want a guy like him there. I think he'd want a guy who has that type of pedigree that Kyle Lowry has. Terry Rozier hasn't really won anything. Now, he was with Boston that year they went to the Eastern Conference Finals with Jason Tatum's rookie year. But he really hasn't done anything really too much in the league. He hasn't gone through the battles that Kyle Lowry has gone through. The wars, the grinding, the periods, the struggles, the uprisings, the championship celebrations, all of it. And I think Ty Lue looks at a guy like that and says, that's what we need to bring here. Because technically still on this team, Ibaka's on this team. He has that pedigree. Kawhi has the pedigree. You bring in Kyle Lowry, you got 3 guys on this team who has championship pedigree. They have won championships. And I'm not saying that's your core or anything of that. But just knowing you have those kind of guys there, that could be what gets you to where you want to go. And we know where the Clippers want to go. They want to be the best team in LA, and they want to be champions. They want to be able to open up their new stadium in Inglewood with a championship banner. And the addition of Kyle Lowry to me would be that piece that could make the difference. Because I've seen a difference in the Clippers play. Now, obviously, they need to, stay healthy, get that chemistry down. That's going to be important for them. But you can clearly see by the way they play, they are still, again, like I said, one of the top 2 best teams in the Western Conference. They're going to be there in the end with the Lakers. Unless something else crazy happens again, I'm expecting a Lakers-Clippers Western Conference Finals. Depending on the seeding, clearly. And so, to me, that would be the best move for the Clippers to make if I am the Clippers, if I'm trying to make a move. I think Kyle Lowry would be the guy that I want to make that move for. So it's just going to be interesting to see if maybe that's something they actually end up deciding to do. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. And before we get out of this segment, I would like to remind and tell you all, please don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball. That is GSMC_basketball. Keep up with everything basketball related there on GSMC. Interact with us there. Give your opinions and takes on the show, things that are happening in NBA, NBA nights, games, highlights, all of it. Keep it with us there. GSMC_basketball. So, stay tuned for the next segment.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about them Phoenix Suns. Phoenix Suns playing real good basketball right now. Talked about how I think they could potentially be the 3rd best team in the Western Conference, in my opinion. I truly believe they could, because the Western Conference, after the first 2 LA teams, I think is truly up for grabs. We also talked about Kyle Lowry to the Clippers. I think that would be a great move for the Clippers if they were able to get Kyle Lowry. I think that would basically fit the need. He can run, distribute the ball. Great leader, great defender. And what's one thing we talk about the Clippers? They don't really have a vocal leader. Kyle Lowry is vocal, and he'll give them that vocal leader that they're looking for. With Ty Lue, I think that would probably be a move I would look at around the trade deadline if I'm the LA Clippers. Depending on how the season goes, of course. But there we go. So now we're going to switch over. We're going to switch over to college basketball. Haven't talked about college basketball hoops. College hoops. I actually have a college hoops on the game right now. UCLA and Arizona State, 33-32 UCLA. College hoops has been interesting this year. With everything that's happened, teams missing games, shutting down, basically for weeks or week because, if somebody gets COVID, contact tracing. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's played all these different amounts of games. It's actually very interesting. Now, they're in conference play right now, so it's been a very weird year for basketball, for sure. It's funny because professionally, NFL-wise, they've been able to do all their games. And in NBA, they've been able to do all their games. Where college is like, it happens, which obviously is different because they're not just around the team, they're around students. Why they shut things down and probably make them isolate themselves. But I'm going to get into some college talk here. AB 25 talk. I'm just going to talk about the top 15 teams in the NCAA right now, currently, with the AP poll that came out this week. Give you an update on who's went 15 through 1. So at number 15, we have Rutgers. The Rutgers Ruck. Yes, sir, the Fighting Scarlets. They're 7-2 right now in the season. They've been good this year. It's actually kind of funny because Minnesota is 10-2, and they're right behind them. So if Minnesota continues to win, they'll probably jump them. But Rutgers is 15th in the country. Then we got 14th, Press, Virginia, coming off a loss, which is why they dropped, because they lost to Oklahoma last week. So they actually dropped about 5 spots. They were actually 9th last week, dropped all the way to 14th this week because of lost Oklahoma, but still a good team. Huggins always has that team ready to go year after year, so they're still in a good spot. We got Missouri, 7-1 on the year, dropped the spot, was 12 last week. Now they're 13th. Lost to Mississippi State, but only dropped the spot. It was a close loss for them. So, listen, Missouri's a team that really has never gotten the respect in the basketball world. Honestly, in general, football too. They really aren't not as, viewed as a great program sports-wise because of that. But overall, they look good this year. Illinois, they were 15th last week. They've moved up to 3, winning streak, 8-3 on the year. Number 11, Houston. Houston dropped 6 spots. They were at number 5 this past week, the last week. But Tulsa was able to beat them on some late free throws, so that obviously dropped them. But Houston's definitely going to be a team that's probably going to be one of the better teams when it's all said and done. Michigan currently undefeated at 9-0. They're at 10. Tennessee, 7-1 at 9. Wisconsin, 9-2 at 8. Creighton, 8-2, 7th in the country. Kansas Jayhawks, 8-2, 6th in the country. 9-2 Iowa. Garza, he's a player. Garza is definitely my pick right now to be player of the year in college basketball. One of the premier scorers in all of the NBA. And listen, he'll be expected to go to the draft this year. This is considered one of the best draft classes, and Garza's one of the reasons why. But they're 5th on here. Texas, number 4 in the country right now, 8-1. Villanova, 8-1 as well, 3rd in the country. And then you have your 2 undefeated teams sitting atop at number 2, Baylor, and at number 1, Gonzaga. So those are your top 15 teams out of the 25 teams in the AP poll in college basketball. So that's always great. That's always great. Kind of want to get into some news, actually, because what's happening right now is the NBA is becoming more optimistic as we switch back over to NBA. They're becoming much more optimistic about having an NBA team. Now, the Seattle mayor, who obviously remember the Seattle Supersonics used to play out there, the mayor is very confident that, or she is very confident that they will have an NBA team return. There's been a lot of talk about NBA expansion as the NBA is starting to gear up to potentially get a team. And that's something that NBA officials have floated, as they actually think that the price tag for an expansion team would be at $2.5 billion. Now, ESPN's Brian Windhorst reported that the NBA is considering expansion as one avenue to help teams offset financial losses amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Team governors do not want to split revenue from expansion franchises with players. A $2.5 billion expansion fee for each team would net the franchises about $163 million apiece. Cities like Seattle and Las Vegas have been mentioned as potential expansion places. Seattle, clearly, as we all know, has a rich basketball history with the Supersonics, who won the NBA championship back in 1979 and 3 conference titles before relocating to Oklahoma City in 2008. Fans have been clamoring for an NBA return to the Seattle since the franchise left the city. Now, Las Vegas is the more interesting option, obviously bigger name, even though if you actually look at the market of Las Vegas, it's not even a top 20 market. But just the name value and knowing how many tourists come there is why it's still such a popular place. But it's the more interesting option, albeit one that may not have as much untapped potential as previous years. Adding a third major sports team to the NHL's Golden Knights and the NFL's Raiders may stretch Vegas beyond its capabilities to support franchises. This is where not being a big market comes into play. As well as increasing the number of states that allow sports gambling, meaning the city may lose some of its attraction as a tourist destination. As we know, COVID-19, the pandemic, has already wreaked havoc on Las Vegas' tourism industry. And so that's going to be the interesting thing here. They're talking about getting that new NBA team. And it'll be interesting to see where they actually put it. But we know our top 2 cities. And we'll have to see if the NBA can actually go ahead and pull it off. And now we have the extra NBA city. And then now we're going to get to that James Harden update news I was talking about earlier. So, only update we really have is that the Heat are reportedly willing to deal many pieces in the James Harden trade. They are open to now offering some of their young players, even a potential first-round pick in a swap. And then, they will probably have to throw in an Andre Iguodala or a Kelly Oubre for salary cap reasons. But as we know, Houston is looking for a king's ransom. And that might not even be enough. Because a potential offer that could be potentially offered to the Houston Rockets could be Andre Iguodala, Kelly Olynyk, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Precious, Acapella, first round picks in 2025 and 2027. And that's a pretty big deal. But they're saying it may not be enough for the Rockets. Now, the Heat, obviously, 3-3 on the season. They don't look like the same team like last year. Last year, when they had this team, they just look like I don't know if they caught people by surprise, but they look just much better. Now they've been inconsistent, alternating wins and losses. Jimmy Butler's right ankle has been bothering him, and we know that can sometimes slow you down. Ankle injuries can be very nagging. And then also, remember, we talked about the Lakers, but the Heat are still playing only less than 3 months after they play in the finals. And so that could also give a reason why Miami may not be playing with that same juice that they were playing with last year. So it's going to be interesting to see. Now, we still know the top destinations people feel like would be Sixers or the Nets for Harden. Like I said, they've talked to other teams. People have talked about the Raptors potentially getting in there. Dallas said they're not interested anymore. Milwaukee feels like he's not good for the culture. It seems like at this point, and like how most teams do it, they're going to wait to see how the teams that they currently have constructed do. See how they come together. Look at what's happening and then say, okay, based off what we know, what are we going to do? Do we go ahead and say, all right, let's go ahead and make the big James Harden trade? But then also, you clearly see, like I said, with the package that was just named Heat, Houston has to like the package they're getting back. And sometimes you think you're offering pretty good packages, and they still say it's not enough. And so, it's going to be interesting to see if James Harden gets moves. There is a part of me now. This is what's going to happen if James Harden gets moved. A team's going to get desperate and say, you know what? We can't do what make a run with the team we have. We need James Harden. And then that's when you're going to see that push around the deadline. Because you have to wait till a team gets to a I need James point before making a move like that. So I think he'll be playing in Houston for the next couple of months. But when that trade deadline comes up in March, we'll know truly what's about to go down. And that's all the time we have here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. Please don't forget to listen to other big podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.